and welcome to Tremco Live, where we're socially distant but technically connected. I am one of your hosts, Marcy Tyler, and I am the Director of Building Science for Tremco.
And I am Paul Hogan. I'm the president of Tremco Construction Products Group. Marcy, I forgot that last week.
Yes, you did.
A tremendous collection of brands and companies and products, systems, and of course, most of all, people.
Yes, we always like to bring up all of our co-workers and colleagues, and of course, industry professionals that we are very excited to be able to get together with you all each and every Friday, talking about design challenges, talking about your solutions, and just hot topics. I like to use the word hot today.
Yes.
Because we are talking about burning questions as it relates to NFPA 285. So, Paul, how are you doing this week?
I'm doing great, but I've been on like video
Yes.
all week, and quite a bit of the week with you.
Yeah.
So, how about you?
Not bad, not bad. We're doing some prep this week for a big meeting that we have going on. So a lot of us have been on camera all week, and I feel like it's 2 weeks. I can't believe it's all happened in 1 week. So.
Yeah. But enough. I like to end the week this way, but it's enough of the camera for the week after this.
Yeah, we like to, as we always like to state, we like to wind down with you guys on our Friday broadcast. So once again, we really do appreciate your engagement with us today. So in the month of February, as we have been talking about, we are talking all about education. And specifically, we want to be able to talk about how we can engage in the industry. So we kicked off the month, Paul, with talking all about education in the industry, how we can reach out, what ways that we can give back to the community. We had Jeff DeQuee on last week talking all about the IMI. So we're pretty excited about all these different ways that we can have outreach. At Tremco, obviously, we're really dedicated to education as well, and continuing education credits for professionals. I thought I'd bring this one up because this is a recent continuing education credit that we have. And this one, Paul, includes a tour of the test facility.
Huh.
So it goes kind of hand in hand with the test facility that we have not too far from here.
Isn't that your new electronic tour? Right?
Yes.
Because we used to like to do that in person.
Yeah, we used to like to do that in person. And back in, I think it was April, we started to say, how can we do these? How can we still engage? Which is where this broadcast came from. But then also the need to do these virtual tours.
Yeah, I'm excited. We're working on, I guess I call it 3D. I don't know if that's accurate, but like in the Harry Potter movies where you see people fly through, but we're working same way that today when you shop for a house, you can sort of fly through.
Yes.
We're going to be doing the same thing for your tour. So we're fine tuning that technology right now and shooting all the core footage. And I think that'll be the new gold standard.
I think it will. It'll be exciting. And specifically, being able to walk you guys through different concepts, as Paul mentioned, through these like 360 views of the different types of testing, or being able to look at these assemblies, I think is that part that we're still missing. That we used to have. So when I think of the testing that we do and the role that we play in the industry, it's about protecting your inner structure. And so I did a little spoof here with jackets. So I call it the jacket of protection. And really what we're talking about is all the different ways that we can work collaboratively on that wall, that roof, that below grade, and protect the inner structure from air, wind, water, making sure it's energy efficient, resilient. And I left off fire specifically because that's what our topic is today. How do we approach fire? We are focused today in our topic related to NFPA 285, which is an exterior wall test. We'll talk more about that, but we're definitely dedicated not only to performance testing, but absolutely to how can we contribute to the industry and the knowledge as it relates specifically to fire.
Yeah, and I think you'll share today, Marcy, we've made quite a commitment in resources, capability, and equipment in that regard. And I can see us continuing to keep accelerating that investment because it's just critical to our product development cycle. And it's also critical to supporting all of our partners out there that's project specific.
Absolutely, yeah. And as always, we like that whole collaborative approach. So, having the capability of doing a lot of this testing in-house helps us from a development perspective, innovation, research, project specific, but then we always like to bring in those testing agency representatives, those consultants, and everyone else involved on the project as well to contribute alongside us. What's interesting, and specifically in this presentation, when I give it at the test wall, we talk a lot about evolution. So not only the evolution, Paul, of our test facility and how it continues to grow, but also the requirements of these test methods. So a lot of times, none of these test methods are new, they just evolve over time, or maybe the requirements of them start to include more and more of that building enclosure.
Yeah, I think every time there's a significant event somewhere in the world, I think it causes everybody to re-examine the test methods and say, can we make it more rigorous, more real world? So my guess is things will keep evolving.
Absolutely.
Because our goal is to have no significant events.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think as we've evolved as a company as well, and we've added on more and more of that building enclosure, prior to having Dryvit and Edura as part of our portfolio, we were focused on a smaller part as it related to the fire resistance, so that weather resistant barrier requirement. And we saw an evolution of what was required of it. This is just a material test, so we were heavily involved in that, getting our products up to speed with testing as it related to a material test. But we knew that this whole holistic approach, this whole assembly test was coming to be something we were going to need to be required, and we'll get into that later on. But in order to do that, we've been able to utilize our fire lab that is not too far from here as well. So what we do, this isn't exactly what we need to do. This isn't the NFPA 285 test, but it gives us a nice line of sight as it relates to the wall before we then take it out to the third party. But I know this is a key part of our roofing.
Yeah, it's interesting. I guess many years ago at this point now, the roofing division made the commitment to have a fully UL accredited fire lab. I believe it's the only manufacturer that's made that level of commitment. And again, it does two things in product development, Marcy. It really accelerates the whole development cycle. But I'm often surprised by how many times it's project specific. And it's not that we don't know our own fire ratings. It's oftentimes we have external partners that are interested in changes in assembly.
Right.
And sometimes we're thinking, oh boy, we really want to run some fire tests on this to make sure things are okay, especially with technology that's really evolving. Like for us right now, the fluid applied is very fast moving.
Right.
So there's a lot of whole lot of changes happening at a very rapid pace, all requiring this type of support.
It's not only investment in our own capabilities, but then obviously investment in that third-party validation as we go through our assemblies. So that has always helped us being able to take that material test, being able to utilize our roofing space, and then of course being able to do that whole holistic fire assembly testing, which this is just a snapshot of what that test is, what our main topic is today, and we're going to go into much more greater detail about this, but it's all about that assembly. So as Paul mentioned, if some piece or part changes of that wall, then we need to take a look at how that can impact it. So really what we're here about today is, how can Tremco help you? As it relates to NFPA 285. There's lots of great information on our website. So I have a little picture there of our website. Just typing in NFPA 285, you're going to get a variety of different things, a lot of our systems that have been tested, and then also the ability to ask for an engineering judgment if you need that. And that conversation can be started from there. We also like to do specific things on our assemblies. So for our Securic X-Core 430 system, we have a sheet that talks just about each and every assembly that we did with the Securic X-Core 430. And then each of them, like I like to say, come with a recipe card. So this tells you exactly what made that wall, what's part of that wall, and each part of that assembly so that you really know exactly what was tested. And that's how we are able to then do these engineering judgments if we need to. So it's definitely an investment that we've made and pretty excited about that. The other main thing that we can do, how can Tremco help, is our ability to bring on experts in the industry, people that we can reach out to so that we can get those questions answered. And I would like to, at this point, bring on our guest today and our expert in NFPA 285. So Keith, welcome to Tremco Live.
Hello.
You did it. Camera and sound. We got it.
I passed the test.
You did. Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today. Very excited to have you on here and excited to call you my friend in the industry. So thank you for being there for us. Why don't you give us a little bit of feedback on your experience in the industry and what your company does?
Oh, sure. Keith Nelson. I am an architect. Don't hold it against me. I've been working in the building envelope world since about 2005 or so, doing building envelope consulting. Currently, I'm with ECS, which is primarily a geotechnical CMT testing group, but we also have an environmental division and a facilities division, which includes building envelope. We're focused on the Mid-Atlantic. We have about 60 staff across the Mid-Atlantic region doing building envelope work. Involved in the industry, you can see some stats there on the board, nothing very exciting, but do a lot of work in the industry and have been talking about NFPA 285 for several years now.
You have been our resource for sure. I've seen you present several times, and it's one of those things that, as we're going to talk about, I mean, obviously it evolves, right? There's been some additions and some changes throughout the years, but it's always good to just kind of refresh your knowledge as it relates to that. You know, so obviously you can, like you said, everyone can see you're widely involved in terms of building science, building enclosure, building commissioning, which is great. We actually have Brian Neely on next week talking about building commissioning. And of course, you are a father of 3, a husband, and I've listed there Star Wars. It was going to be my polling question, Star Wars or Star Trek, but I didn't. I know you have some fun little guests there with you in your office.
Yes.
Yeah. And you know what? So clearly, Keith, there you go. Clearly, Keith is Star Wars. Paul, Star Wars or Star Trek?
I would go with both. I've never really understood either, Marcy. How about you?
That's a good question. I think I like both too, but I was a big Star Trek, space, the Final Frontier. These are the voyages of the Starship Enterprise. I could keep going. I was more of a Star Trek.
Well, as a kid growing up, absolutely. Yeah. Star Trek was, I forget, obviously we're dating ourselves, or certainly I'm dating myself, but I think I saw original episodes.
I was more the Jean-Luc Picard, next, you know, second generation Star Trek, but anyway. So
I'll try not to hold it against you.
I know, exactly. That's what we said. People who say one or the other, then they can be let go of the program. But our polling question today, so obviously NFPA 285 is our topic. We're just going to pull up our polling question real quick. Keith, you can't answer it for whatever reason. You just can't. I don't know why, but all of our guests can. So I'm going to launch that polling question right now. So I'm asking everybody right now, the question is, you know, what have you specified or participated in a project related to NFPA 285? So answer 1, yes, I've been involved. Answer 2, no, I haven't had a project requiring. And the last one is, I'd like additional training and information on it. So we'll give you guys a few seconds there to answer that polling question so we know what's going on with our audience.
While you're answering, just a quick comment. You mentioned how you know, this has kind of been an evolving topic, and I mentioned that it's something I've been talking about for many years. It's still one that there's a lot of confusion out there. I think why we continue to talk about this topic, and so I think it's I appreciate the opportunity to come and talk with you guys again today. Absolutely,
yeah, and I think there's some other ways that you and I'll chat about how we can continue to bring this information. I know you already do. I think you just presented with ABAA, so the Air Bear Association of America, had you present several times. I saw you here in Cleveland present, I believe, as well. You know, and then obviously with the different Building Enclosure Council meetings. So I know there is still confusion. You and I talked yesterday about a couple projects that I'm working on right now with our reps to try to understand that. Involvement. So thank you everybody for voting. We'll take a quick look at what came out of that. So we've got a good amount here. We have 41% that have been involved in a project, 50% haven't. So that's kind of interesting. And then a good amount want some follow-up. So I'll definitely work on that follow-up because as you mentioned, there is a lot of confusion out there. So with that, let's get through some of this information that you so graciously prepared for us so we can talk more about it. So
this is when sorry.
No, it's okay.
I was going to say, this is when I try to boil down my 90-minute presentation into like 10.
Yes, exactly. You can do it.
I need the micro machine guy here talking for me.
Exactly.
I interrupted you, so if there's something else you want to say, or I can just jump in either way.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think, obviously there's a lot of confusion. People think it's new, right? And it's not new. It's just what's being included in it is somewhat newer. So
Yeah.
go ahead, tell us about that.
Yeah, and so the important piece is not new. It often feels new, maybe less so today than 5 or 6 years ago, but it feels new. But the important thing is it's not. It was in the building code as early as the mid 1980s, 1988, and it really sprung out of a Federal Trade Commission ruling which happened in the 70s based on a fire that happened in the early 70s. And so it's definitely a topic that's been around. It's not new. It was in the original IBC back in 2000, and it's been in the IBC ever since. So it's not new. And
I think obviously our involvement came in when they started to require the weather resistant barriers and how we wanted to really, and we've really tried to embrace it. And we appreciate, Paul, your support through the years of making sure that we have that, that money to support it and do those tests associated with it.
Well, and I think that's the important, one of the kind of the critical things of the progression is NFPA 285 and this vertical and lateral flame propagation when we have combustible products in non-combustible exterior wall assemblies really started with foam plastics. But once it was introduced, we saw that there were other combustible products that we were including in non-combustible assemblies that were contributing to flame spread. And so with that, the building code has expanded. The most critical piece is as we increase the energy efficiency of our buildings, specifically looking at thermal improvements, and we're trying to get as much R value as we can into as few inches as possible, that often pushes you to foam plastic materials, which is again putting combustible products in a non-combustible assembly. So as we get more energy efficiency and we're pushing towards foam plastics particularly, it's going to increase your need or the triggers within the building code of needing to comply with NFPA 285. But there are other triggers as well, but increased energy efficiency has definitely raised the level of need and awareness. And then the next. And then, probably not more critically, but equally as critical is that as the code has developed, Marcy mentioned that WRBs were added as a trigger for NFPA 285 in 2012, and with what I would consider a pretty aggressive code requirement that was added in 2012 that included WRBs, just kind of point blank, if you have non-combustible assemblies higher than 40 feet with a combustible WRB, which by the way, all of them are, then you have to comply with NFPA 285. And so that really increased the need to understand this and to comply with it. And what the graphic is showing on the screen is that we study, and it's only through 2012, but there hasn't been a lot of change since 2012 to 2021 now, but showing the number of triggers within the building code over time, and then just a huge leap of triggers for NFPA 285 compliance when it came to the 2012 IBC, as those were adopted across the country. And then of course we're talking about it because now we have this requirement for NFPA 285, and it's not a test that you can run out and get for $1,000 for your project. It's a test that not only costs money, anywhere from, based on the articles that are out there, $20,000 to $30,000 per test, plus the getting the people there, getting the materials there, building the wall, and assuming that you pass the first time. So it's an extensive investment. It's also an investment of time, just because until recently there weren't too many labs that actually conducted this test, and most of them, once you got on the schedule, you were talking about 6 to 9 months before you could actually perform the test, assuming the first time. So there's a significant impact if you're trying to look at this on a project basis.
Well, this is what I was mentioning to Paul earlier. We embraced this early on, and I think we've had at least 30 to 40 burns at the different labs. And we love bringing people in when we do them, because I think it's impressive to see, and we like people to be able to see, what's involved, and that behind the scenes thing I think is interesting. You take all that time to build it, and then you set it on fire. So
it brings out the 12-year-old boy in all of us.
Yes.
It is a very impressive test. It's a large test. It's called an intermediate scale test or a reduced scale test, but the reality is it's still huge. It's 18 feet tall, it's 13 feet wide. But it's a reduced scale because the original test, when it came out of the Southwest Research Institute, based on the FTC ruling and the research that was required there, it was 25 feet tall. It was done outdoors, and it used wood as the fuel source. But through some study and trying to make the test smaller, so it would be less costly and less costly. They were trying to make it as small as possible, and they found that once they got below the current size, which is again 18 feet tall, they weren't getting results that were correlating to the full-scale test. So that's why it's kind of the size it is today, because once we got smaller than that, we didn't get correlating results. So it's a reduced scale test. It's done indoors. Now it's done with a gas source that's calibrated. It's a very impressive test. It's things to understand about the test. It simulates flashover, so it assumes it's a 30-minute test. At the 5-minute mark, the test is assuming a flashover condition, which is essentially a fire that's been allowed to burn without suppression, and it's gotten hot enough, around 2,500 degrees in the room, where the gases in the room actually explode, which is then blowing out the window and then potentially getting fire on the outside of the building. And that's really the starting point of the NFPA 285 test, and then runs for 25 more minutes with increasing fuel load. The point there, it's an intense test.
Well, and I think that's it's interesting. So Paul, when I say we've gone to the roofing lab, it's more to see, how will that, new product we're developing, how will it propagate or spread, but it certainly doesn't mimic this, because you start the fire inside a room, as Keith mentions, then you're assuming now the window has broken. A window doesn't break, they just light another fire source on the outside, and then they see how far it spreads and where it goes. I know you said this years ago, like that, how intense that fire is. Do you have a way to explain that in simple terms, that how intense that fire is?
So I don't have the numbers in front of me, but what I used to include in my presentation is actually trying to, because it's talking about 50,000 BTUs per minute, trying to understand what that is, and so I did a calculation at one point that looked at like standard gas log fireplaces that you'd have in your house, and at the end of the test, I think it was something like 180 gas log fireplaces burning on this apparatus. Just as an equivalency of what kind of energy is being imparted on the system.
So it's extremely intense. And once you stop the test, then they still wait and observe, right? Is that correct?
Well, so yes, but I think that actually
once they stop the fire.
Yeah. So after at the 0 mark is when they start the interior burner, and then it increases. At the 5-minute mark, they start the window burner, which is indicative of the flashover. Both burners then continue to burn with increasing intensity for 25 minutes. At the 30-minute mark, so after 25 minutes of flashover, then everything's shut down, and there's another 10-minute observation period to ensure that the flame isn't spreading, that it's not self-extinguishing, but the flame is reducing and it's not continuing to spread. So there's a 10-minute observation period. I think that's actually changed in the most current edition, that they've taken that 10-minute observation period off.
That's right. Okay.
I will say most failures occur. There's lots of different ways that you can fail the test, but most failures occur as there's a series of thermocouples throughout the specimen, so in the different layers, but also in different locations in the specimen. And I think it's like thermocouple 27 or 28, but it's the center thermocouple on the outside of the wall, directly above the center of the window. It has a 1,000 degree pass-fail criteria, and that's where most of the tests fail, is at that exterior thermocouple.
And I know we talked about this being an assembly test, and we talked about how important it is that to know exactly, if you're referring to an assembly test, you need to make sure you know exactly what was tested, because if anything changes within that assembly, you need to then have it reviewed again.
Yeah, and that's the, in the presentation, I say if you take nothing else away from this presentation, know that it's an assembly test, and it's an assembly test more than something like an E119 or equivalent test, which gives us a fire rating of a wall assembly, the 1, 2, 3 hour fire rating, because it's 3-dimensional. It's not just the layers of the wall assembly, but it's also how that window opening was detailed, which is critical to whether or not you have a compliant installation. And the slide that's on the screen is an example of a specific project incident that I had when we were looking for compliance, and the installation instructions, which we were told to follow if it had compliance, is what was on the left-hand side. And it basically had spray foam all the way to the opening. Without going into too much detail, the right-hand side is the specimen as it was tested and passed. And the critical feature is, besides the magic nails in there, is that they added 1.5 inches of mineral wool between the flame source and the foam plastic insulation, which, if that's the way the test passed, then that is a requirement in the field as well to be compliant. And so it's critical to understand how, not just the layers of the system, but also how it was detailed. And I think the other important piece of information is that if someone is trying to sell you an insulation that is NFPA 285 compliant, that's not exactly true. It was tested potentially in a compliant system, but unless you have the full system, including the details, it's not compliant as a product of itself.
Absolutely, yeah.
And it's also important to understand what NFPA 285 isn't. It's one aspect of the building code. There are many aspects of the building code that make our buildings safer and allow for people to get out in the case of a fire incident, also protect our first responders. So the example that I always give is, a question I'll get is, well, my exterior wall assembly is 2-hour rated because of other reasons. Do I need to have 285 compliance in addition to that? And the answer is yes, because they're two separate sections of the building code, and one compliance with one does not give you compliance with the other. So it's important to understand that there are many aspects of the code that make our buildings safer, and NFPA 285 is just one small piece of that.
And I like the image there of showing that, the internal burner, the external burner, and then that border is the thermal couples as well. That
yes.
That duration of that. So I know you wanted to talk a little bit more about the model code adoption. So I thought, this would be a good slide for us to share and talk about as well.
Yeah, well, so I think this one I threw in there just not so much to talk on, but to let people know that there are specific sections, and I list them there. And that's usually, if people ask for a slide, that's the slide that people are asking for, so it's handy. And I think you're going to have some handouts available for people afterwards, and this is included, so it'll give you a good reference. I will say this is based on the 2015, I think, code, and there are some slight changes when you get into 2018. I think 1403 becomes 1402, and so on and so forth.
And that's key, right, to understand what is being represented there, because you and I talked about that last night, where I was referring to the 2015, but the individuals I was talking to were referring to a different, I think it was the 2012. So
yeah, well, and that's absolutely critical when you talk about WRBs, because 2012, as I mentioned before, was pretty aggressive on its requirement, where 2015 that was backed off a little bit, and I've generally been successful. If there's a jurisdiction that has a 2012 code adoption, they haven't gotten to 2015, you can usually ask for a code modification based on future adoption. Generally that's successful, but ultimately it's always up to the code official.
And is that where we should go if we have questions to the code official to talk about when there's some of these exceptions and some confusion?
Well, after you call me, yes.
Okay. Which I did, which is what we talked about yesterday.
The code officials are a great place to go, and they're ultimately the ones who are they have the authority to make the ruling on whether or not you comply. So, you mentioned earlier engineering judgments, great tool. Generally they're done very well, but ultimately it's up to the code official whether or not they accept those engineering judgments. There have been jurisdictions that have just blanketly said they will not accept them. I think most of them have changed their minds since then, but just something to be aware of.
Yeah, well, and I think there's been a lot of discussion about them, and I think what's important is the other data that you gather, right? You gather, E84 data, you gather, cone calorimetry testing, you look at, all these other factors, and as long as you're not adding to the load, there's ways that we can have discussions about just that. So I know you wanted to talk a little bit about type 3 construction.
Well, just to throw it out there, because this is a piece where I would say there's actually some conflict in the building code when we talk about type 3 construction. where FRT wood or fire retardant treated wood is allowed as it's an allowance within type 3, even though we're talking about a non-combustible construction. They allow a combustible material provided it meets a certain criteria, which is based on E84.
Which is there that lies a lot of the confusion.
Yeah,
where
when we
right? So, yeah,
where we define combustibility based on E136, which is a very intense test, and you see the image there. But the critical piece is, especially when we're looking at the WRB exceptions in 2015 and later, if you have an FRT, a type 3 construction over 40 feet tall with FRT wood and a WRB, if it's combustible, which they all are, you have to comply with NFPA 285, but the challenge until the 2019 NFPA 285 is they did not allow the specimen to be tested with an FRT wood assembly. And so that created some challenges in being able to comply. There are some engineering judgments out there that basically say that because type FRT wood is allowed in type 3 construction, it should be considered non-combustible. But there's some debate over the veracity of that claim.
and of course, as always, things are continuing to change and things are getting updated and evolving, like this recommendation, or not recommendation, requirement of having a joint included as well.
Yeah, and this is going to be very important as jurisdictions start to adopt the 2021 IBC, because that's the first edition which adopts the newer version of 285, the 2019 edition. And in that 2019 edition, there is an identification that the joints in systems have a significant impact on the performance of the test. So if you are going to have an assembly, say a metal panel assembly, and there's going to be a joint above the window, the test has to include a joint within, I think, 6 inches to either side of the center line of the window. And if there's not a joint, included in the test specimen, then in the field you cannot have a joint above a window or penetration and still be compliant. It's going to be a challenge. It's going to be a challenge for the industry and for manufacturers like Tremco, quite frankly, because you have a lot of tests out there that were tested probably with systems that include joints but didn't have a joint included above the window. So now how do we deal with all these existing tests?
So yeah, we're definitely getting involved with that for sure. I know we're pressed for time here, so I know there was more information that you wanted to share with everybody in talking about compliance paths. And then, of course, just kind of wrapping it all up, would you be willing for us to host a special event where you go into much more detail with NFPA 285 for us?
I'm happy to talk anytime about this topic if it brings more education to the industry, because there's still a lot of confusion out there.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we would definitely love to be able to have that, so you and I can chat about how we can bring out some more of this topic and in a way that we can have more time for people to ask questions. So in the beginning, we asked the polling question, wanted to know what people's involvement has been. And I know when you conclude, you like to bring these questions up front again to talk about, the liability and the issues that you see. So final comments for us before we say goodbye?
Well, I think so. The polling question would be interesting to phrase it that way, and who's participated in a building that requires 285 compliance, and going through and looking at the triggers. I wonder if that number would change before the presentation and after the presentation. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding of what is triggering 285, and I have found that there are designers, contractors, code officials who don't realize that they've tread into assemblies that need 285 compliance in their projects. And so again, that's where I think the education is important. So I appreciate the opportunity to come and talk a little bit about this. And it's a topic I speak on often because of, again, the ongoing discussion. So thank you for the opportunity.
That's great. So yeah, we'll definitely bring you back on. Keith, thank you so much for joining us on our broadcast today. We will be in touch with you soon.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. So Paul, lots of information here to digest in a short period of time.
Well, yeah, as well as, Keith brought up the changes that are taking place and how it's like the joint assembly that you just mentioned.
Yeah.
It's requiring a lot of support.
Absolutely. So we'll definitely bring Keith back on for a future broadcast where we can focus completely on NFPA 285. As we continue to talk about education this month, we wanted to make sure that you are all aware of a great educational series that we have starting on March 2nd. It'll kick off talking all about building and energy codes of low slope roofing with our friend Jason. Then we'll go into foundations and fenestrations with Mark. Then we'll talk about connectivity, bringing it back to the basics with Gene. And then of course, the essential guide to restoring parking garages. So this is a 4-part series. In our thank you email, we'll make sure that you guys have that capability of registering for that. There'll be a Tuesday track and a Thursday track. And we'll probably look at having something like NFP 285 in our next series. So really dedicated, bringing these great experts in to help answer those questions that everybody has. And as always, as we go through this content, keep your feedback coming in. And if you want to join in on the conversation, all you need to do is email me at mtyler@tremcoinc.com because we would love to have you be a part of Tremco Live. And with that, I think that wraps us up for today.
Well, Marcy, it's been quite a week.
It's been quite a week.
And we look forward to seeing everybody next Friday, 3 o'clock.
Next Friday, all about building commissioning. Thank you so much and have a great, safe weekend.
Take care.